Brian, welcome back.
Thanks. Good.
BP, welcome to the show. Thanks so
Thank
much
you.
for coming on.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Jonathan.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you here. I've been reading your book, about 2/3 of the way through it. I will just summarize it by saying reading it makes me think, how can I be a better person in my daily life? It's really been powerful in that way, just the material I've already absorbed. Um, Obviously, your book is written in order to instruct commanders of infantry units that are facing combat in the near future. What makes a good infantry commander? If you can summarize that or give us some of the details, even if you can't summarize it.
The summary is in the title.
Okay.
So the title is Passion of Command, the Moral Imperative of Leadership. And I use passion in the medieval Latin sense of the word, which is to suffer for love.
Mm.
And so the premise of it is whatever the Marine Corps gives us first rate training. However, I posit that whatever compulsory training you go through in the Marine Corps to be an infantry officer is insufficient to have the lives of America's sons and daughters in your hand.
Okay.
To have them, their very lives rest on your competency. And so, what does it take to go above and beyond that? In the book, I detail that. It's the moral imperative of leadership is to leave it all out there on the field and to do more. And so I talk about, trying to expand my physical and mental endurance. So started running marathons, and that wasn't hard enough. So I ran ultra marathons. And then I did multi-day, adventure races where we moved for 72 hours straight, mountain bike, hike, kayak without sleep.
Okay. You were doing this while you were
while
yourself.
I was on active duty, but I was doing that on my own, and then got into mountaineering from that because, again, that's it's an existential event. You're physically roped to another person. And you just find out what your limits are by putting yourself in the hurt locker.
Yep.
And expanding those things, just like you would on the mat in jujitsu.
Sure.
You find out what those boundaries are, and every one of those little suffer sessions is an inoculation.
Okay.
To stress and pain and discomfort, and most importantly, doubt. And so you build this Rolodex of suck, is what I call it. And so I can
a Rolodex of suck.
Yeah, so I can go back through this Rolodex we may not get to Iceland, but when I was in Iceland, and there were 25 of us that started, only 8 finished in this coast to coast race. The 4th day was a long 62-mile mountain bike, 5,000 feet of vertical climbing, 4 river crossings, and it was done in, we started off the day in a full-on 15, 20 mile an hour headwind with rain. And everybody was hypothermic by the time we got to mile 17, the first checkpoint. And only 8 of us continued on. And so I had to go back into my Rolodex of suck and find like events, whether it was serving in the Arctic Circle, high altitude in the Sierra Nevadas, any of those type of things. Like, okay, this is when I was in the hurt locker, I was in the pain cave, and these are the mechanisms I have at my disposal to grind through that. And I've learned to flow through those things now instead of just grind over the years. And so there's a difference. Flow is finding joy in the suffering.
Okay.
And it's about your relationship with pain.
Yep.
And suffering.
Okay.
And it's not this monster.
Grinding sounds more antagonistic.
It is more antagonistic, and it is happening to you. And you still need to have that gear.
Yep.
But I try and get out of grind and into flow to where we're knocking down the miles and having fun doing it instead of just grinding down my molars. Yeah. So,
Grind miles, not molars.
yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring up the Latin, for passion. We were talking about this, I think, last week, where there is a more medieval sense of suffering, which implies a passing through or an undergoing of something. But that passing through, undergoing is formative in a way. In many modern instances, I would say when people say, "Oh, I have to suffer through this," they're talking more about that grinding sense of I have to endure it. I have to just wait until it's over, something like that.
I'm
Where,
growing
yeah,
through this.
yeah,
What I'm doing.
you're trying to grow through it rather than just go through it. Yeah, yeah,
So we talked before about the Suffer Fest that we do every year.
yeah.
I just added another event today.
Oh, you
So
have your new adventure lined up.
we got two actually. I got January. I'm gonna go to Big Bend National Park in Texas, and we're gonna do first day's a 17-mile hike, and then a 15-mile hike the next day, and then a 50-mile mountain bike, 15-mile paddle, and then a 58-mile mountain bike each day. Me and my buddy that's us also recovering Marine. And then in April, we're going to do start at Meteor Crater outside Flagstaff and 150 miles in 3 days to the Grand Canyon.
All on
50 of it,
all on foot.
50 of it on foot, 100 miles of it on bike.
Wow.
So, mountain bike. So,
Wow.
and so, but I say that to say this is that I learned coming out of the Marine Corps that I needed a predator in my life. And so the Marine Corps was really good at putting predators in front of me.
Okay.
And whether it was school, deployments, combat, 6 combat tours.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I retired from that, I had to go find my methadone.
Yep.
To come off that.
Yep.
Because I had been living on crack cocaine, and metaphorically,
Sure.
to be clear,
Yeah.
to our listeners, that metaphorically, crack cocaine, the life I was living, licensed,
License to kill.
license to kill,
Right.
to
Required.
go do those
Required to kill.
things, and required,
Yeah.
and have lives in your hand in combat on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
And then the strongest drug I got off after that back in civilian life was maybe Diet Coke.
Mm-hmm.
And so you go from methamphetamines to Diet Coke
down to Diet Coke.
So what's my methadone to bridge that gap? And so that's where that started. And so I wrote a manifesto a few years ago, and I update it every year called, remember, you may be dating myself here, but the PBS special or series, This Old House.
Mm-hmm.
You know that?
My
Yeah.
family.
Yeah, so everybody knows it.
I
So-
watched my dad watch This Old House. Yeah.
And so I call it This Old Carcass. And so I'm 62,
Mm-hmm.
and I am in the last 1/3 of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm looking at it, and I was just talking to Brian. I had this realization that compared to what I used to do, I was sedentary. I'd go to the gym, I worked out, I did all those things, but I was, comparatively sedentary to what I had been doing. And so, what I wanted to be intentional about what the future looked like. And so, for the next 30 years, what do I want to, when I'm 90, what do I want to be able to do? And then how do I become fit for purpose? And so that just started a whole nother journey of trying to figure these, so the Sufferfest is part of that.
Right.
Going and getting my PhD was a intellectual predator.
Mm-hmm.
At the age of 55.
Yep.
Going back to school to get a terminal degree.
Yes.
And so those were all about intentionality.
Okay.
And trying to, if you say you're going to be a lifelong learner, show me, prove
Sure.
it.
Yeah.
And then what?
Right.
And so it's about being fit for purpose, mentally and physically. So at the age of 91, I don't know why I came up with that number, but at the age of 91, I think but my father-in-law was 91.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be able to engage in the world around me.
Yep.
On my terms.
It is true that I look back at the men in my family, and it's pretty consistent that they all die at a certain age. And so you have to sort of assume, like, with barring something catastrophic, you you can probably count down within 2 or 3 years, right? I mean, if I look at all my great uncles, it's all between 92 and 95, which on one hand, yeah, we're sort of lucky that we've gotten more. Yeah, apparently we get more time than most, but at the same time, it's like, oh, that's basically the clock.
And the quality of that, those 30 years. And so Peter Attia writes about it, there's lifespan. And our medicine is great at about extending our lives, but not the well span.
Yes.
I think as he calls it, the quality of your life.
Absolutely.
And so if you spend the last 30 years of your life going to get dialysis because of choices you made
50 years ago,
50 years ago, about your diet, your exercise, all those type things, and you are now truly sedentary and you can't engage in the world the way you want. And you're sitting around watching reruns of Matlock with a blanket on your lap at the age of 65.
Love Matlock. And my grandma sewed that blanket. How dare you?
So
Andy Griffith's Great American Hero.
Right.
Yes. They have a new Matlock coming out.
Do they really?
Played by, I want to say, Kathy Bates.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
It's a great idea.
Yeah, I love it.
So
Kathy Bates.
I probably have that completely wrong. And
You can verify.
If you did, someone's now going to make it.
Right.
Idea.
You're right.
Kathy Bates.
It's a Matlock they should have made with Kathy Bates. Honestly, there's a dozen things or more that I'd love to jump into and what we've just talked about. But I just want to circle back before we get too distant from it. Combat infantry officer, you mentioned wanting to be more ready than what your training provided. In your book, you talk about a superior officer coming to you and challenging you with how have you improved yourself to better lead men since graduating as an officer. Can you expand a little bit more on what qualities that you've tried to develop in yourself, specifically in order to better lead young men in combat and help them achieve their objectives and survive?
Yeah. So, my role as I saw it was to take young Americans, and in my case, they were all men. It was in Operation Iraqi Freedom 1 and 2, the initial invasion, and then Fallujah. And it wasn't until 2015 that the combat exclusion law was repealed for women in combat arms. Women are in combat. It's not in the combat arms, infantry, armor, artillery. But they're in combat. They're dying. They're bleeding out like everybody else. But they removed those restrictions. So my comments are about men, young men, 18-year-olds, half of them, last year's high school senior. To give you some perspective. So when I was leading those men into combat in Iraq, a year before, they were at their high school proms.
Wow.
And now I'm going to take them into the most caustic environment to the human soul and psyche and physical being that exists on the planet. And they're going to be required to fight and to kill. And they may not come out physically whole, but I'll do my best to make that happen, but make sure that their souls are intact, that they're whole.
Yeah.
And so what does it take? There's definitely, as we all know, technical and tactical competence. You have to know your business. But I think there's an emotional intelligence piece of this, because war is a human endeavor. It's a clash of human wills, and it's fought by humans that have hopes, fears, dreams. And once you go into combat, I have 1,148 Marines under my command, and sailors. And when things come grinding to a halt, and everything is on the line, all of their hopes, dreams, fears, and futures come to rest on you. And as I like to say, and you will find yourself at the confluence of fate, circumstance, and history, with lives in the balance and the mission in the balance. What's in your wallet?
What tools do you have to bring to the situation?
What have you done other than what the Marine Corps made you do to prepare for that moment? Mentally, morally, physically, spiritually. And so we had a mantra, and it's in the book, commit to the mission, trust in your brothers, make peace with your maker, and then fight with a happy heart, because the rest is in God's hands. And to get to that point of release, you truly could operate, and you didn't operate from a point of fear. You fought with flow, you fought with joy, but not in a this is fun, but you were where you were supposed to be, with the people you're supposed to be with, doing the right thing.
Does euphoria occur in combat?
How do you mean euphoria?
I think I've felt it once. I experienced it as a freedom, a separation, a distance from all hesitancy, all hesitancy, all intimidation, and all second guessing of what I should be doing in the moment. I felt as if I was sort of aligned with the very thing that I should be doing in the moment. Absolutely. And I remember the moment, and it's really only happened to me once, where there's not that second voice in my head. Brian, you and I have rolled on the mats many, many times, but I'll say whenever we roll, there's always, even we're in this intense physical, this competitive physical encounter, but even so, most of the time, there's some other voice in my head that's apart from the thing I'm doing in the moment. When I say euphoria, BP, I'm thinking of that one time in my life where I felt truly free from the consternation of that second voice.
Thanks for explaining that. I would not describe mine as euphoria, and probably for a couple of reasons. I write at the beginning of the book, when I'm trying to describe and draw the reader into what it was like. And so 21 days from the time we crossed into Iraq to we pulled the statue down in Baghdad. First 4 days, we did not sleep at all. It was constant moving and fighting. And so, with all the adrenaline hits,
96 hours of constant activity.
and adrenaline is overrated. It will not get you through.
Wow.
Because your endocrine system just shuts down after a while.
There's no more hits of adrenaline to provide.
Done.
Yeah.
And then after that, it was maybe 4 hours of sleep, taken in cat naps in a 24-hour period for the rest of the way. And all those are punctuated by firefights and those type of things. And so I was in kind of an energy conservation survival mode.
Okay.
And so I don't think euphoria is how I could describe it.
Okay.
I think it was more of a sense of satisfaction that we're doing, the lads were executing as they were trained. A lot of frustration, early on because very few of us had combat experience. I had combat experience from 1991 in the first Gulf War. Not a lot, but I'd seen the elephant and I kind of knew a little bit about it, and I'd been shot at and I knew what that was like. And you've got these, as I described, the 18-year-olds that are in it for the first time. And so in a lot of ways, early on in the 21 days, I was taking more risks than I normally would to show the dogs how to hunt. So there was a point where we're trying to enter a building in this one town that we were clearing, and they didn't have their act together, how to do a building entry. So I just walked up, booted in the door, and was the first one in. And the squad leader, who was in charge of the squad, was livid with his guys, and he was telling them that will never effing happen again. And so that was the point. And so there's a little bit of I wouldn't say theatrics, but there was a point to be made.
You wouldn't say theatrics about the leadership, but there was a public display that you wanted to get across that this is how we do it.
This is how we do it.
Even though most of the time you wouldn't be the one to do it, but this time.
And the more that happened, as we went on, I had to do that less and less as you saw them become combat veterans before your eyes. And these 18-year-olds became pretty savvy fighters.
Okay.
By the time we're approaching Baghdad. And so the maturation was incredibly rapid.
I think I read somewhere that most commanders think it takes 3 years to train a unit to be ready for urban combat. Is that an exaggeration?
Yeah, I don't think time it's not 3 years. I don't think. And I had extensive combat in urban all the way to Baghdad, and then I fought in the first Battle of Fallujah. It is an extremely demanding domain to try and fight in. It's three-dimensional. Control is very difficult, and so pushing that training down to the lowest echelon and the communications is difficult. But I would tell you it's what you do with the time that you have.
Okay.
Time is less of a factor. You've got the amount of time you've got to figure out how to do this.
And so we talked a little bit about the commander's course, and one of the mental models I produced and teach for training is like, I give them a scenario, they go through it. I'm like, oh, was this good training? What's good? We've all said good training. That's good training. Well, what is it? Define it. And, they hem and haw around it, and they have the tacit knowledge to kind of poke at what they think good training is. But like, well, how do you've got 20 years of experience. The commanders I teach anywhere from 16 to 22 years of experience. Well, how do you teach that to your lieutenants and your sergeants? Well, so the mental model we have, is it efficient? Is it effective? Are you modifying behavior? That type of intentionality. So it's a triangle. And how are you assessing it? And so
efficient, effective, and are you modifying?
Yeah, all training is about behavior modification.
Yeah.
I'm trying to create certain behaviors. And are you intentional about the behaviors you're creating? Because you can create wrong behaviors in training with the wrong mindset.
Yeah.
And so so it's I think the 3 years is I don't know where that's not backed up by any analysis. I'm pretty sure. So I don't know where that came from, but I would argue that it's not. It's what you do with that 3 years, or that whatever time you have.
But it sounds to me as if early on in the conflict, you had to be the one kicking in the door and leading the way in, so that the people behind you could learn to be that person themselves.
Once or twice, and it was about decisiveness on the battlefield and commitment to the whatever movement we're going to do. When you go through the door, if you're not doing it with 100% commitment and get into your corner, getting out of the fatal funnel, which is what we call the door, whatever entry, that's the fatal funnel. Getting out of that, getting to a position where you could dominate the room
Sure.
on the corners. That has to be done with your ears pinned back.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's
Right.
That's what I was trying to get across.
I suppose the opposition, if they're looking at anything, they're looking at the door. So that's where they're going to tend
All
to
the barrels were trained right there.
throw bullets at that
Yeah.
direction. You and I went back and forth about this a little bit in our emails. It sounds like both of us have some exposure to the work of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky.
Mhm.
They were involved with trying to train Israeli infantry officers. Sounds to me as if in I want to say the 60s, the Israelis had certain exercises, such as you're going to give a group of 5 men a log, a big wall. They have to take themselves, this log, they have to get all of them over to the other side of the wall using just the log and whatever, and themselves, and they can't let themselves or the log touch the wall, right? Things like this. And apparently, again, this is from what I read, they were finding that the officers who could rise to the occasion for exercises such as this, there's very little correlation between officers who rose to the occasion to help get through exercises like the log challenge to those who were effective infantry commanders in actual combat scenarios. It sounds like you and I have both had some exposure to this. Where have improvements been made, and where do improvements need to be made in identifying and improving really good officer material?
One, we still use that course.
Oh, okay.
So the Marine Corps, it's called a leader reaction course.
Uh-huh.
And there are 12 such problems. And you do it out there, and they're screened off, so you can't see what the next one is, what's happening over there. There's 55-gallon barrels you got to get across, a water obstacle, any number of things. Get a 200-pound mannequin from point A to point B, and so we still use that, but we don't use it as predictive analysis as Kahneman was trying to do. Who's going to make a good officer? Whether or not they can solve the problem. We don't care if you can solve the problem, because what we care about is that you do something. So a poor plan
That you try.
Yeah, as Patton said, a poor plan executed violently is better than a perfect plan executed meekly. And so we're looking at initiative. And so the way we do it in the officer candidate school, you're out there, it's the small unit leader evaluation. So you're being evaluated the whole time. And there's 13 of you in a squad, and you rotate being the leader each time. And you would do a tactical problem, attack a position. And then the 13 of you would go, and whoever was the leader would take them to the leader reaction course. Then you'd hike 6 miles around, start over again. You do that 13 times over 3 days. And so if you're the guy that is the last leader, you have a squad of zombies who really don't give a rip about what your plan is, but they're looking to see, who still can organize, come up with a plan, communicate that plan, even if it doesn't work. Nobody cares if it doesn't work. Because they are, I mean, and there's a trick to each one of them. There's a way to solve the puzzle. It's basically a human puzzle.
But can you get these zombies to move in a meaningful way
Yeah.
and not think about brains?
Yeah.
Just a few minutes.
Yep. Not think about brains for just a couple minutes. And so that's, we still use that, but we don't use it as predictive analysis. Like, oh, this guy's going to be great in a firefight. Other than the fact that he took action and showed initiative. Solving the problem isn't, I mean, it's great, but it isn't predictive of how somebody's going to do as an officer. And so there's also the emotional IQ that I talked about earlier in there. I mean, can he meet people where they are? Because again, it's all about humans and making that human to human contact. And I talk about just, the well of fortitude. So, I talked about the stress of having 100 or 1,148 souls, last year's high school seniors. And I saw a guy and losing Marines in combat, following your orders and looking into people's eyes and giving that order again and again, and the next day and the next day and the next day. And to have
We've taken this street, now we got to take this street.
That's right. And to have the resiliency to keep doing that. And I saw commanders deal with that two different ways. One was they husband the lives of their Marines and became timid and overly cautious. And timidity breeds more casualties.
Mm.
And the Marines want to go. They want to go do their job. And I think Marines are the easiest thing in the world to lead.
Yeah.
They just ask for your very best every single day. And all you have to do is give your very best every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll give you theirs. It's a pretty easy contract. Or I saw people withdraw from that connection and become distant and distance themselves from that human to human contact. And so the way I recharged my well of fortitude, and Dr. Grossman talks about it. He wrote this book called On Killing, the psychology of killing. And it was the well of fortitude is like, what gives you the resilience to keep going at this every day? And how do you replenish that well? Because if you're not replenishing it and all you're doing is pulling buckets out, eventually that bucket's going to come up empty. And, that is when somebody shatters in combat and becomes combat ineffective.
Yeah.
And I saw a commander do that.
Yeah.
My ranking commander do that. And I was incapable of leading anymore. And he had husbanded his Marines. And so for me, to give those orders and see Marines killed or maimed following your orders, the only way that I could square that was to get closer to my Marines.
Wow.
And to and so they may have thought I was trying to motivate them by going down and talking to them, cleaning my weapon with them, eating a ration with them, sitting in their fighting hole with them. But I was actually filling my well.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
the very people that you were going to order into the most dangerous situations, that actually became more possible by spending time with them. That's counterintuitive.
It's trust, it's love. And so Easter Sunday, 2004, April 11th, we attacked into Fallujah, the first battle of Fallujah. Lost 3 Marines. I was physically present for 2 of them. One of them was Tory Gray, who was the youngest Marine in the battalion. So the Marine Corps birthday ball that we have a tradition. We have a birthday cake, and the tradition is the oldest Marine present, which was not me, feeds cake to the youngest Marine, passes the cake to the youngest Marine, symbolizing handing down tradition. Tory Gray was the youngest Marine in between our first deployment, and he had joined the unit. And then before we went back for our second deployment, a few months, 5 months later, to Fallujah, he was there. That day, Tory was in a position providing security with his partner, Curtis, Lance Corporal Curtis, Bobby Curtis, and they came under fire. Curtis was struck in the chest and his plate by machine gun bullets. 2 of them knocked him down. Tory covered Bobby's body with his own and was killed. And it took us a couple hours to get Tory's body back, and to fight for that body again. And a couple days later, we evacuated Bobby Curtis. He went back to the rear, blunt force trauma, a few days later, he came back and we're still fighting in Fallujah. And we, what we've learned about PTSD is if you just isolate somebody, they will shatter. But if you bring them back to, not right back in the front, but close to the front, and then slowly, it's like treating a cold injury, like treating frostbite. You got to warm it up slowly and bring them back. And then finally, he was back in the line, and it was like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I'm going from fighting position to fighting position, checking on Marines, and there's supervision that goes in with that. But my squad leaders and platoon sergeants, platoon commanders were so good. That was wired. And so I was there when things are hardest, you need to be seen the most. And we're 15, 20 days into fighting, house to house fighting in Fallujah. I come to Bobby Curtis's hole, and he's on watch. The other guy in his fighting hole is on sleep. So we're 50% alert is what we would call it. And I crawled in his hole with him, and I just held his hand for a couple hours. And I just said to him when I first got it, they're like, "Yeah, we're all sorry about Tori, but I'm glad you're okay, and I'm glad you're back." And
I want to make sure I understand correctly. He got hit in his chest plate, and then his friend jumped on top of him
and was killed.
And yeah. Okay.
And so I'm just glad you're okay, and I'm glad you're back. And we just sat there for a couple hours until it was his turn to go to sleep, and then I moved on. And I don't think I slept that night, but that was an investment in that kid's psyche. So fast forward 20 years later, April 2023. It was 19 years later, wasn't it? Yeah, 19 years later. We have our very first reunion in Vegas. The boys put it together, and there's about 350 that showed up out of this unit, which is quite a bit.
Yeah.
20 years later. I was apprehensive about going.
Oh.
Not sure. I mean, I remember things one way. I'm not sure how they remember things. The first night, it was 2 nights. The first night was in this biker bar called a Leatherneck bar. Leatherneck is a euphemism for Marines.
Sure.
And I've got my wife in an Uber with my sister-in-law, and we're driving out there. And it is just strip mall, or it's a strip club, pawn shop, tattoo parlor, repeat.
Yeah.
And we pull up, we get out of the Uber, and there's all these guys that, long hair, beards, full tats. And I'm looking at them like going, those are my guys.
You recognize them.
Yeah, I recognize them. And so I was 41 years old at the time. And so they are now, at that time, my age.
Yep.
Because it's been 19 years.
Wow.
20 since we did the invasion.
Wow.
And went in there and we're talking to them, and it was fantastic, what they came up. And in the middle of that, I'm standing there with my wife, and Bobby Curtis, I'm talking to a bunch of Marines, and Bobby Curtis walks up. I don't recognize him at first. It's been 20 years.
Sure.
And he goes, "Sir, Lance Corporal Curtis." And he says, "I just want to know you're proud of me." And then starts to sob. And I pulled him in for a hug, and he put his head on my shoulder and just bawled. And it was, I don't know how to describe that. I guess the lesson in that is, like, we impact people our whole lives.
Yep.
Every encounter is a chance to either fill them or drain them.
Yep. Add to their well.
add to
draw
their
from it.
well or draw from it. And so that's what I walked away with.
Mhm.
I'm like, so that 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever it was, I spent with him in his hole that night,
Mhm.
impacted the rest of his life.
Sure.
And I didn't know that. I mean, until he told me that.
Would you be able to put words to why you were feeling apprehension going into the event?
Like I said, you remember things a certain way.
Mhm.
20 years, throw alcohol on that, and then who knows what's going to happen.
Sure.
But it was, um, I mean, my wife was treated like royalty, and she didn't know me at the time. And so when I was giving my remarks, and most of the Marines weren't married at the time. And so when they were putting this thing together, I said, okay, if this is going to be sitting around a campfire, getting all shitted up with alcohol, I'm not interested in telling war stories. But if this is a chance to bring in our significant others that didn't know us, or if you were married at the time or had a girlfriend at the time and suffered through that, this is a time to recognize them. And it's a time for your significant others that didn't know you then to know what you were about.
Yeah, a side of you that was totally invisible.
Yeah. And so when I gave my remarks, I said, this is who's in this room. These are who these men are.
Mhm.
And I go, my wife doesn't believe I ever made it to Baghdad because I can't find anything in the fridge, right? Without help, because it's right there. You're man looking, and so
This would be a good time to tell them about the French reporter that did need to assist you with finding the statue. That could come up later.
That can come up later. Yeah.
You might need that.
Okay, the
Yeah.
French reporter. Yeah. Shout out to the French reporter.
Yeah. And so
she's not wrong.
she's not wrong.
Mm.
And so yeah, so I guess I say all that to say you don't know the impact that you're having.
Sure.
I mean, you're swinging a heavier bat than you think, and that can cut both ways. And so
The moment you ignored someone because you were like, man, I'm so hungry, I'm so tired, blah, blah, blah.
people ask me, what would you do different? People read this book. What would you do different? I'm like, I think I'd be kinder. I'd be kinder. Not that I wasn't kind. Not that I wasn't. I mean, clearly they would not have embraced me 20 years later.
Yeah.
There was a certain armor you had to keep on to still, replenish your well, but you are also given life and death orders. You're imposing discipline on people. And there was one Marine that I had punished 3 times. He showed up, and I was like, well, see how this goes. And he was like, sir, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. You held me accountable. I'm a better man for it now. And like, glad you think that because you're a big dude, So, and 20 years younger. So yeah.
Right. I know. Yeah.
I was curious when you said you lay it all out there and you do more. Did you ever feel like I guess my question is every morning you wake up and you hope you'll do a good job for the day, At least that's my prayer when I wake up, unless God help me live a good day. And many times I look at that day and it's like I didn't give it all I had. Did you ever feel like you couldn't give it all? Or did you feel like every morning you woke up, you're like, I can't give it all every day?
Turn to the last paragraph.
One that begins for the love of his men.
Read that.
The love for his men is what allows a commander to apply and maintain his willpower, and the conviction and aggressiveness to close with the enemy. He must be able to literally and figuratively look himself in the mirror each day of combat and know he had earnestly applied himself and had nurtured a passion for command. With a melancholy rigor, he must apply himself in the serious study of warfare, its effects on those who fight, and earn the moral authority that grows from leading in the zone of aimed fire. I will always harbor doubts over my efforts prior to and during combat, and whether or not my personal preparation and leadership was all it could be. For the rest of my life, each time I look in the mirror, I will be acutely reminded of my shortcomings, and a piece of my heart will chip away. For in the shadow of my eyes, I will see their faces, staring back at me for the rest of my life.
So, people say, well, you did the best you can. I'm like, I earned the right to say that. You only know your own heart, right?
Yeah.
And there's always something else I could have done. So I was shot once, blown up twice, and decorated for valor. And I would tell you, for every act of valor you're recognized for, there's probably 3 or 4 acts of cowardice that nobody knows about. That
Sins of omission.
sins of omission, I could have done more. I could have made that move. I could have, been more exposed. And I gave the enemy every chance to kill me.
Right.
But there were still moments like, and there's, I've been criticized openly about being too far forward, and like, oh, you're reckless, or you're seeking glory. My original commander threatened to, trying to say, preserve my life, to like take me out of the line.
You're too quick to be the one kicking in the door.
Right. And so those stories got out pretty quickly. And the first day of the war, I jumped up on top of an Iraqi tank that wasn't moving, but it was combat locked from the inside. There were guys in there, but they weren't fighting. We did not know that. And we're in a fight. I've got tanks around me. They're shooting other tanks. I look over and there's this thing. And so we wound up destroying it, but
If you need it.
wouldn't eat. And so I think that factors into it. Those that impose risk must be seen to take it. That's the lead by example. But this is fine line of like, the worst thing you can do is go out and get yourself whacked in front of your men.
Because your men need you in a different capacity.
And and then I remember, once the dogs became great hunters, you just see in their eyes.
Sort of a, sir, we can handle this, versus a, sir, what can we do? What do we do?
Let it get out of our way. And so I describe
old man.
Yeah. And so by the time we get to the Al Qud firefight that I describe, they were full on. They were a full on machine. And so as I'm, I was caught in the initial ambush. They came up, and I became almost, after I got the ball, the things moving, got the infantry up, got the artillery going, got the tanks up, I gave that radio call, and all that was happening. It was just kind of, I almost became a spectator to the slaughter. As I watched these kids move in and rip through this enemy position that was fortified, and I was following along. And it's a grenade fight. We're throwing grenades back and forth at each other. We're better grenade throwers because we had thrown 1,000 of them, practice grenades. And they came back to me, not for leadership, but to rip the extra ammo off my body. More grenades. They ripped my grenades off and took my magazines. And like, you don't need this, We're actually doing the work here. And they went to work with rifles and grenades, the way our forefathers had. And if there was ever a moment of euphoria, close to that, was then. It's like they have arrived.
When you were being mugged for your personal equipment.
It was like, that's what I was,
Praise the Lord.
yeah, that's what I was going for. That's what I was going for.
Mhm.
Because if I had had to kick doors in all the way to Baghdad, I wasn't going to make it.
Right.
Right.
Sure.
Those laws of, the law of averages don't work out for you.
Yeah.
And it's not my job.
Yeah.
Right.
Brian, I think you've shared something similar talking about both your time teaching wilderness medicine, but also time teaching martial arts to people is right. It's like, you're teaching someone how to deliver a good kick, and, you're again and again and again and again. Right. And all their kicks or their chokes or whatever are really pathetic. But then there's that time when they just hit you really well. You know what I mean? And your leg is quivering, or or you're like losing consciousness because someone's choked you so well, and you're like, they've done it.
It's almost like this misty eyed. Oh, they're so,
Right.
so grown up.
And sometimes that's a 10-year-old,
Yeah.
10-year-old forearm on my foot. Like,
Right.
oh,
Oh.
damn, she could knock me out. If she kept going, I would be knocked out by her.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
No, that-
rewarding.
yeah.
Strangely rewarding.
Strangely
Strangely
rewarding. Yeah.
And so,
Right. Thank God they can kill me.
Yeah, it's very rewarding.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I can die in peace because, I can, hand it off to the others.
one of the things I taught, I try to teach my officers is like, and I got this a lot, and this is going to sound braggadocious. Some of my Marines that moved on, you go to other units, and these kids that grew up in 3-4 did 2 or 3 deployments with us. How we trained, the efficient, effective, modifying behavior, just how intentional we were with everything. Went to other units, and it wasn't the same.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, everywhere I went, it wasn't, and I got calls from like, I'm having troubles here. Like, your job is to not throw your hands up in the air. It's like whatever little piece of the Marine Corps you're put in charge of, whether it's one other Marine or a battalion of Marines, is to make that little corner of the Marine Corps as much like Camelot as you can.
Yeah.
And to invest in those Marines, because your legacy, my legacy, isn't ribbons and badges and medals and accolades. It is the leaders you leave behind that influence other leaders. And so it's kind of like the coaching tree, if you will.
Yep.
And so the people that you have imprinted on go on and produce other leaders.
Gotcha. I also get the sense from reading your book that it is the leaders that you imprint on. It's also the guys who are still around to meet you 20 years later because they weren't put in a body bag 20 years ago, and sent home with, with whatever honors we can give to the dead, but rather your quality of leadership lowered what you call the butcher's bill.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
If we could, my idea of a fair fight is club and baby harp seals. That's as fair as I want the fight to be. And so I owe it to, fathers and mothers across America to make those fights happen. So your failure as a leader, your lack of technical and tactical competence, your failure will be retrieved by valor, the valor of your Marines. And so if your Marines are winning a bunch of high level medals, either you put them in a bad position or somebody put all of you in a bad position. Sometimes that just happens, right? And then, but if that's what you're counting on, is because we're going to win. I knew we were going to win every fight because I had a bunch of big-hearted Marines. I love them. They like I said, they're the easiest thing in the world to lead, and they're tough. They're smart. They're aggressive. They
an enemy that is not up to the task.
not up to the task.
Not.
And my goal was like after first contact, the enemy will fear us more than they hate us. They hate us today, but tomorrow they will fear us.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, that's interesting. What's going on in these militaries in let's just start with the Middle East, and Israel accepted particularly. Can you tell us what's going on in some of the military cultures in that part of the world, whether organized or unorganized militaries? Why is it that there's this huge gap in capability and leadership? Specifically, in accounts I've read of just the casualties on each side, right? Where it's like, yeah, that we lost 6 people, the enemy lost 94, right? That to me speaks of something very stark going on in the military capabilities on each side. Can you dive into that?
well, um, I can dance around it.
Okay.
It does come down when you see numbers like that. There was a tactical overmatch.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably contrived. And so when I talk about Club and Baby Harp Seals, that is a tactical overmatch. I'm going to stack the deck in my favor
Mm-hmm.
with supporting arms. And so I have all these assets I can bring to bear.
Mm.
And we call it combined arms, which is you put the enemy on the horns of a dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter what they do, it's a bad choice. And so I talk about the book a little bit.
You do, right.
They either got up and ran and were cut down by
Rifle fire.
or they stayed in their holes and were ripped apart by high explosives,
Mm-hmm.
grenades, tank main gun, those type of things. And so those are your choices.
Mhm.
And
So is it a matter of you are showing up with more and
you're
you
showing up
fill
with
in that blank?
you
whatever more
are
is.
applying combat power. And so on the mat, it would be showing up and breaking the person's will,
Yeah.
breaking them down. And so that whatever move they make is going to
Yeah.
be the wrong one.
It's a bad outcome.
It's a bad
Yeah,
outcome.
I was right there when you
Yeah.
said that. It's like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, there's a few times. It
Yeah.
doesn't happen a lot, but there's a few times on the mat where that does happen. My cynical self, when the question was posed, my cynical self just said, it's a matter of dollar signs, isn't it? I mean, you just show up with more
That
training,
will
more
get you
bullets,
that will get
more
you
high
so
explosives.
far, but it doesn't.
Better
You can still
leadership.
have a very high butcher's bill, even when you do that. And so history is replete with examples of higher class armies showing up. So I mean,
Would
look
that
at
be like the French in Vietnam?
U.S. and Vietnam.
Yes
Yeah.
and yes.
Yeah.
Yes and yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Now,
both.
I mean, we killed millions
Mm.
of
Yeah.
of Vietnamese.
The numbers are still staggeringly
Yeah,
opposed,
Yeah.
but he did not win anything.
we didn't win the war. I mean, never lost a battle. Didn't win
Did
the
not win
war.
that war.
But French lost battles.
Yeah.
And so they were outclassed.
Yeah.
Dien Bien Phu, they were just out fought. And the French fought magnificently at Dien Bien Phu. I mean, you still had, even though it was a completely lost cause, you still had French paratroopers dropping in to be with their comrades, knowing that they weren't ever going to come out of there. And so it wasn't a lack of courage. And the people I fought didn't lack courage.
No doubt.
I mean, they were facing a juggernaut. So when I talk about the task force I had, 1,148 Marines and sailors, 75 armored vehicles, 15 were the M1A1 Abrams tanks, and then armored personnel carriers and armored breaching equipment. This thing was a juggernaut. I mean, the earth shook when we moved, and you think about, the United States industrial military complex, the politics, the policies, all these things that put an 18-year-old, last year's high school senior, at the point of contact with the enemy. you know, and you're closing that last 300 yards to come to blows with the enemy. That was my domain.
Mm.
And so everything that pushed us in that direction was was the thing. And so, I mean, after all that, I mean, I went back to school, got my master's degree. The Marine Corps sent me to the National War College to get my master's degree in strategic studies and national security policy. So, which is when I had the opportunity to write that book. And just so, I mean, people that really know me know I would never sit down and write a book. So I was at school.
They had to hold a gun to your head. Right.
There were about a dozen of us. It was early in the war, 2004, that had a significant military experience, combat experience from that conflict. Everywhere from a guy that was the lawyer for Brenner, who was the civilian in charge of Iraq after the initial invasion, to guys like me and guys that did the Thunder Run, some of these events. And so they pulled 12 of us out and said, we want you to write about your experiences, but it needs to be at the strategic level.
Okay.
Like, I don't know nothing about strategery. That's why I'm here.
Right.
To learn about, strategy. Yep. And like, okay, well, I'm like, what's in it for me? And like, well, you get extra credit. I'm like, I just did back-to-back combat tours, shot once, blown up twice. And you think you're going to like, what, am I going to get a gold watch?
Right.
Nothing, right?
Yeah.
Extra credit.
Pat on the back.
And like, well, okay, we'll let you write out of the writing requirements for course 5603, 04, and 05, which is basically the rest of the year. The mandatory writing requirements. I'm like, shut up. You had to 5603. And so I sat down. It had to be a 35-page paper. In the afternoons, I went to a coffee shop and I wrote, there were a couple things I wrote, like The Boy by the Side of the Road. I don't know if you got to that point.
I did.
I had written about that before, just kind of journaled on it. And so I was able to leverage that and some of the other things I did to prepare the battalion. But I wrote that in about 4 sittings. It went through probably 100 edits after that. But what to write is fine, the edit is divine. And there were, as Stephen King says, you have to kill your darlings.
You have to kill your babies.
Yeah. So there was a lot of darlings that didn't make the cut in there. But and it wound up being about 100-page. And when it was finally edited down. And so I had this manuscript, and like, so I had over delivered on what I was supposed to do. Electronic versions that started to make the rounds, and General Mattis, later Secretary of Defense Mattis, who I had 5 tours with, was my division commander for both of those tours.
Yeah.
And I will probably spend some time on a therapist's couch at one point in my life trying to sort out that relationship. But there's not another general I would rather go to combat with.
Okay.
I loved him, loved the man. We all loved him. But he goes, you need to publish this. And I'm like, I was just trying to get out of writing other stuff. Yeah. I'm like, and now all the other kids are going to beat me up at recess.
Right.
For writing this.
For getting out of 5603 and 5604.
I mean, they're all going to go like, who does he think he is? And so when Mattis asks you to do something, there's
one answer.
There's one answer. You're the mouse staring at the cobra. And so I did it, but I did it with the Marine Corps Association, and I did it so that money never touched my hands, and all the author proceeds go to Simplify Foundation for Injured Marines. And so that's how a bill becomes a law, right? So that's the story behind the book. And it's become mandatory reading for infantry officers coming in. And so I still, this last spring, I went back to the infantry officer course, and it's funny, they had taken it, they had just like dissected it down to the DNA level. Like, paragraphs. And I'm like going, guys, I was just like trying to get out of writing other stuff.
Right.
This is like,
Right.
this isn't sacred text.
And then, what do you
You
think
know.
he means in
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
superlative
Like, I'm like,
clause?
yeah, it's like, what were you thinking? I'm like, probably wasn't, but
Right. I've got an hour before this coffee shop closes, so let's bang out another 3 paragraphs.
4 more pages today to write.
Mm.
Yeah.
yeah.
I'd love to get your take on some of those higher level strategic questions. What are your thoughts on the justification for the invasion of Iraq?
Yeah, good one. And so, any PTSD I suffer,
Mhm.
and I do, um, um, came not from what I saw or did, but for what I had other people see and do.
Okay.
You know, those 18-year-olds I talked about.
Yep.
And to inspire them to do something that our country in the end wasn't really willing to win. So you can win the fight, but lose the war politically. And, you know,
Is that in a certain sense the story of many American wars post World War II?
yeah.
Mm.
And so, and I would put that blame on both the Bush and Obama administrations.
Okay.
Um, they weren't interested, and I was in Afghanistan as well. I did my last 18 months in the Marine Corps was in Afghanistan.
Okay.
And I watched us. We're getting Marines, Americans are getting their arms and legs blown off, losing their lives every day, and it was clearly a political football.
Yeah.
And that's not okay.
Okay.
We weren't trying to win. And then what you saw Biden do with the withdrawal from Afghanistan, I didn't sleep for a week.
Mm-hmm.
You could not have if it does not pass what I call the frozen Russian space monkey test. So if I go and I pull some monkey that's been in orbit and frozen solid for 50 years out of orbit that the Russians put up there, thought him out, showed him this problem, and he comes up with a better solution, you failed the frozen Russian monkey space test.
I think we've got the title for this episode.
Yeah. Yes.
Frozen Russian monkey. Yeah. Okay.
Space monkey.
Space monkey test. It ain't easy.
That could be a T-shirt.
Yeah.
Write that down.
Tom, we can make millions. Yeah.
I need a sponsor.
Right.
Shout out to Noble Oak.
Right.
So, so the moral injury is worse than any physical
Mm-hmm.
injury. And I have lost I lost 10 Marines killed in action, which is a relatively low number, which I think you were for the amount of combat we had. And that was what you were talking to, a general officer coming up to me, like, how did you keep your casualties so low?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we didn't give it away cheap.
Mm-hmm.
We were good at knocking people down and putting them down. And
You put in an immense amount of preparation
you better.
and attention to detail prior to the actual contest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those fights were won ever before the first round was fired. So those are won in training. What they say, it's a cliche, but the more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war. And it's true.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I have now how we got there. As a lower marsupial infantry battalion commander, nobody's interested in my opinions on politics. They're interested in my ability to lead that battalion. And
Be at the tip of the spear.
Be at the tip of the spear, accomplish your task and purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say this, and I spoke at, it was at Boulder, Colorado University in Boulder, and it was Conference on World Affairs. I was on this panel, with Medea Benjamin, who is a Code Pink, professional antagonistic protester. I actually had a drink with her afterward. But I kind of accused her of drive-by activism. Like, you just drive by, whatever's the color of the day,
Latest,
greatest thing. I'm going to protest and get a bunch of But what have you put skin in the game for? And somebody asked. The question was asked is like, well, should we have been there? Was it worth it? The war's still going on, so this is, I'm still in uniform.
Mhm.
So I was the only uniformed dude there, in a very liberal place. And I said, listen, every town that we uncovered and liberated in the 300 miles to Baghdad, in almost every town, there was a police headquarters and a Ba'ath Party headquarters right next to each other.
Mhm.
The Ba'ath Party was Saddam's party in power.
Yeah.
Ba'ath
It was
was
a
UA's.
predominantly Sunni party.
Sunni.
Okay.
Yeah. So most of the population is Shia, but
Yeah.
the ruling class, if you will, are Sunni.
Right.
And which led into sectarian violence later when we pulled out, ISIS moved in, all the things that Obama's administration did.
Mm-hmm.
And more people had to die to reset the balance. Every time we went into in either the Ba'ath Party or the police headquarters, there would be, you go down to the basement and there was a torture room, hooks in the ceiling, mattress springs with car batteries hooked up to them, power tools, you name it. And there was always a scrapbook with their before and after pictures. They loved doing that, almost without exception, and logbooks. So they were meticulous record keepers, so they could probably show that they were good Ba'ath Party,
that they were fulfilling
doing
their
their job.
quota
Yep.
of pain.
Yeah. And so, it's, you see those things, and you see the way the Saddam Fedayeen treated the population. And when we rolled into Baghdad, it really was like Paris 1944 with people coming out of the street. So we had just been fighting house to house. We had crossed that bridge that you saw the picture of. I lost 2 Marines doing that.
Yep.
And we're fighting, and we were really expecting a knockdown, drag out city fight, and we started out the morning of the 9th that way.
This is April 9th.
April 9th, and everything just disappeared. All the resistance ceased. And we're starting to pick up momentum, and then we're starting to see people in the streets, which is a good sign. You see children. And I got this call over the radio, you need to get to the Palestine Hotel. And I'm looking, I basically have the equivalent of gas station maps. And I'm like, where is it? And I'm looking, I'm like, it's not my zone. That's another unit's zone. We don't care, get there. So got it. I'm driving, and on the way, we come around this big traffic circle, and we're just making it up as we go. And, people are coming out in throngs. And so there is no playbook for this anymore. And I'm pulling up, and I see a white guy in the crowd. And I'm like, hey, he goes, hey, it was the French reporter Brian was talking about. I'm like, do you know which way to the Palestine Hotel? So I had to ask directions, which is not, not a John Wayne thing to do.
Right.
John Wayne,
especially from atop of an Abrams tank. Like, where am I going?
Tanks behind me.
Right.
But so we're making it up as we go. And he goes, it's right down here, so off we go. And then we secure that. And the Palestine Hotel was important because that's where all the Western press had been sequestered.
Oh.
And I don't know if you remember Baghdad Bob. He was I guess the Jin Psaki of Saddam Hussein's regime, who would come out and give press release and talk about how the Americans are drowning in their own blood.
Mm,
And this is the mother of all battles.
right.
And then
Oh.
he kept that up until we were on the outskirts of Baghdad. So the Americans are nowhere near Baghdad.
Mm.
And so I actually went into his and had my picture taken at his
At his
podium.
death. Oh,
At
okay.
his podium. And
Baghdad Bob.
because we started having our own meetings there.
Yeah.
And for a short period of time, like one night, I was the mayor of Baghdad. And
Oh.
yeah, it was like I was, until everything caught up, but
Hmm.
you're there.
Right.
And
But you had punched through to sort of the
Yeah.
heart of the city.
and punched through the heart of the city and took down what was the recognizable, and other units were hitting Saddam's palaces, which were all over the place, but no Saddam. And
Well, the civilians, weren't they attempting, just failing to pull that thing down?
Yeah,
And
and
someone
so-
runs up to you.
yeah, I had 1,000 things going on.
Mhm.
I'm securing the water treatment plant. I'm securing a power plant. We're running around. There was no plan for this other than storm the castle. So we stormed the castle, dog caught the car,
Yeah.
figured it out.
Mhm.
And then there's the big Saddam statue, and people are saying, they're trying to pull it down with a rope. And there's this huge Iraqi in a tank top with a sledgehammer, chipping away at this base, which is probably 30 feet in diameter. And it was like, well, and all the media that we just liberated is out there filming this. I'm like, this is going to be a buzzkill when this thing doesn't come down.
Yep.
And it was this sense of euphoria.
Yep.
And and then they ran up the American flag, put it over Saddam's face, and then pulled that down, put an Iraqi flag up, and then that got the crowd happy. And then my tank company commander came up and said, we gave him the rope and the sledgehammer. We could pull that thing down with our tank retriever. It's a 30,000-pound crane,
Like
right now. And I'm like, not what we're here for.
We're not here for a PR stunt.
But this is going to be a buzzkill, kind of like read the room, called my boss and said, hey, this is what's going on. This is a situation I'm looking at. I recommend we pull it down. He says, okay, just don't drop it on anybody, which was harder to do because as we're starting to pull this thing out, it is this 30-foot bronze statue is coming down like this, and the Iraqis are running right underneath it. Like the idea of consequence.
Mm.
And so we had like
Right.
pushing them back.
Saddam's last kill.
Yeah. And I had to say, it was like, if you don't all get back, we're not going to pull it down. And
There you go.
and so we pull it down, and they stormed the thing and tore it apart with their bare hands, basically. Ripped the head off, tore it apart. And then we came under, gunfire a little bit later. And so it was still the wild, wild west. And we fought, for several more days in and around the city,
Okay.
mostly against criminal gangs that were, I probably responded to, I don't know, a couple dozen bank robberies.
You
So
have
these were
National
opportunistic.
National Museum,
Yeah.
banks that had Abyssinian artifacts and Assyrian artifacts,
Okay.
save those from being looted.
Okay.
Another tip from a French reporter, so those guys are worth something.
Shout out to the French.
Yeah. Shout out to the French reporter. Where are they today? So, yeah. Well,
So,
who knows? Maybe they're in the Gaza Strip. Who knows?
So it was like a movie that hadn't been written, and then the looting started.
Yeah.
And that was ugly. We should not have been surprised by that, but we were. I wrote a separate piece on that, and I called Baghdad Redux or Redo.
Mm.
For the military. It's kind of a lesson learned thing. We should not have been surprised by that.
Sort of, you have to be prepared to clamp down on a city.
Well,
after
I mean, in
you liberated it.
1991, when we bombed Baghdad, they looted
Mm.
and Saddam wasn't even gone. And so now Saddam was gone. And so you talk about the pressure release and the criminal gangs. And so what they looted wasn't like department stores. They looted the infrastructure from their power distribution system. They looted the infrastructure from their water distribution system. So they had no power, no water. And I was told, McCoy, get the power and water back on in Northwest Baghdad.
Wow. So like, let's go in and grab all the copper.
Well, yeah, that's basically it. So we
Got all
like,
the
well,
turbines.
somebody used to make these things run. Where are they? So we're basically going through the streets. We found Iraqis that would cooperate with us, and so we're going to the streets. Basically Hansel and Greteling it to find people who know somebody who knows somebody, and to get the experts in there. And okay, what do you need? Oh, you need 30,000 pounds of copper wire on it.
I know a guy. Right.
If we were in West
Yeah.
Virginia, I'd tell you who to go to, but we're not. And so yeah, surreal was the best way to put it. And then 5 months later, we were back for Fallujah
Yeah.
and in that fighting, and
And was that coming from some sort of Sunni power base, or was this a different?
that was Sunni.
Okay, that was
Yeah, that was Sunni, and the sheikhs, and that all started with the 4 American contractors that were killed and strung up on the bridge, who happened to be former Navy SEALs, at least a few of them.
Were these Blackwater contractors?
Yes.
Okay.
And so, we were, everybody got liquored up on that. President Bush got liquored up on that, and we really didn't want to go in and handle it that way. And so we did when we were ordered to. And the sticker shock from that was more than people could bear. And then we wound up negotiating and handing the city over to the very people we were fighting, who had rebranded themselves as the Fallujah Brigade, same dudes we were fighting, gave them weapons, gave them radios, gave them vehicles. I'm like, okay, you guys got this. And
Keep your promise.
keep your promise. They didn't. And 6 months later, I wasn't part of the second battle, but they had to go in and now fight all over again. And they were more ready for us.
They had your stuff.
Well, they had our stuff, but they had, prepared the city for a defense. And so when we did it, we ran into a few, what we would call kill houses, where everybody in there was prepared to die. And they had dug into the foundation. So if you had tried to enter this room, there would be loopholes cut into the walls where they're shooting at you from shin high, an explosive device above the door to get you as soon as you came in.
Jeez.
And so they were kill houses.
Yeah.
And so we started to, run into those, but not many. When the guys went in the second time, those were every block.
Every house you had to take.
Yeah. And a lot of times you'd have to go to the top floor and attack down.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd have to get to the roof and then attack down, because it's just easier to attack downhill.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways. But when you get a casualty and you don't keep your momentum going, now you got no way to get that casualty out. So there's, it is, extremely difficult. So the Marines that fought those fights, that's varsity level stuff.
Right. Right. And I guess to what end? To what purpose? To what? Right. To maybe you're asking, what did we gain long term, or?
Well, I guess what I told my Marines, and so we, in the first battle, people lost their nerve. Our political leadership lost its nerve.
Okay.
There was pressure from the Iraqis to let them handle it. So this Fallujah Brigade became the solution. And so it's like being up 50-0 at halftime.
Mm-hmm.
And all we got to do is, like, our boots were on their throats.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell when you've won the fight and everything they do is wrong.
Yep.
And you're taking ground and killing enemy pretty easily.
Yep.
and you've got momentum. And we stop. And we surrender the city to the enemy. So it's 50-0 at halftime, and we forfeit. And as we pull out, we can hear them singing and playing drums and blowing trumpets, celebrating their victory. And so I have to look at my Marines, who we lost 3 Marines on Easter Sunday
Mm-hmm.
and a bunch more wounded. That it's okay.
Yeah.
You did your part. You won your fight.
Hmm.
That's all that matters.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody's interested in our political science degrees.
Right.
So
Is this the price of war under a democracy?
it is the Clausewitzian Trinity. The people, the passion, and people,
People,
the passion of the people.
Hmm.
You know, it's basically like the rhetorical triangle: pathos, legos, and ethos.
Yep.
And so, but we saw the Clausewitzian Trinity come into play, and it was the politics. You know, we got into the fight because of passion, and then politics got us to stop.
Yeah.
And so nobody wanted. They were the sticker shock
Hmm.
of what house to house fighting really looks like. Nobody was
Okay.
willing to pay that.
We got all hot under the collar because of images, visceral as they are,
But
about
we lost.
Marines on a bridge, former Navy SEAls.
Yeah.
Fallujah was exceptionally rough though. Like
Mhm.
those images coming back, that's going to start killing all sorts of political careers. It's all a morass of just gross. I'm not trying to defend anybody here, but Fallujah stands out as some of the roughest fighting that you guys had to do.
It is.
Yeah.
It was the roughest fighting since Way City in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And so urban always is, because it's always at close quarters.
So those are going to be easy, sadly,
So,
easy
yeah.
political decisions to make.
Yeah. And so every room,
Mm.
every door that one of those kids had to go through,
Mm.
Maybe his last.
Mhm.
And you get through that, and you clear that room, and you clear that room, and clear that room, and clear that building. And then you got to cross a street, which is covered by sniper and machine gun fire, and clear the next one.
Do it again.
And do it again.
Right.
Yeah. And so,
Right. And this is affected by people who are looking at, this is in what, April 2004. So you're looking at,
that was me. November 2004 was the second battle.
okay,
All 5.
but still, so the first time you were there, you are being affected downstream by decisions of people who are looking at the election in 6 months.
Mhm. And and then you're also in this, it's an insurgency. So
Mm.
when we, Fallujah was actually in some ways a relief, because it was fairly straightforward.
Mm.
There were still civilians involved. But when we were moved back out west to Al Anbar, and we're getting, IEDs, improvised explosive devices, insurgents, the enemy is doing everything they can to look like the civilian population. We would set up these traffic control points, to, search vehicles and keep munitions and bad guys from moving. And there was this disconnect between us and the Iraqi people that I think what we learned was they saw their police and checkpoints as shakedowns. We see our police as protect and serve. And so there was this, you could have signs out, you could have barbed wire up, all these type things to get them to slow down, stop, and they would gun it with a family. And so, what I tried to teach my Marines is like, some of the standing rules, the expectations of combat leaders was don't kill what don't need killing. We're not here to look for the green light.
Mhm.
But you can't put too much cotton between the finger and the trigger to where they're not vigilant and they're not going to protect themselves and protect the civilians around them. And so it was always this thing. And so when we had one of those events that's not the outcome anybody wanted, and a vehicle, accelerated at them, tried to run roadblock, and you shot and you killed, and you found out that
It was kids.
it was just a family. And so what we did was always conduct a preliminary inquiry, like an informal investigation inside the unit, reported it immediately, just to freeze the facts and collect the facts, because facts have, unless you capture them, morph into narratives. And so this is what happened. This is how it happened. And I would tell my Marines, if you did the right thing for the right reason, and were operated within the rules of engagement and the law of armed conflict, we have got your back. And because we were going to be judged by men in air-conditioned offices 6,000 miles away, men and women. That's the reality. Once the initial push was over, and the patriotic fervor, and the war became more static, everything that was left behind, all the bureaucracy, all the politics, couldn't keep up with us as we're advancing. And once we stopped, it was like a wave coming over the stern when you take the power off the speedboat.
Right. All of a sudden, Langley was sniffing down your.
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah, don't get me started on Langley. Ixnay on the Langley A.
Right. Excellent on the Langley nay. Jeez.
But yeah, I mean, so yeah, there was there were those things that had to be managed, and that is all. I talk about the habits of the 5 habits of combat leadership, and one of them, that I don't write about, but the thing you're fighting for, the most important battle you have to fight as a leader, is for the hearts and minds of your Marines. And you have to fight that fight every single day and win it. And if they don't think they're backed, they think they're out there hanging. I mean, that's what you saw in Vietnam, all the bad stories, to where they're just pawns in a bigger game.
Okay.
And you can't allow,
they're one trigger pull away from being a scapegoat.
from being in prison.
Yeah.
Officers being murdered in their quarters.
Yeah.
Right. That was the thing. Fragging people was a thing.
I explained it like this. I mean, we're over here, you're in uniform, you're a legitimate target. Nobody else is until they are. And that, and it's just, and they got their minds around that. And so you have to look at every Iraqi as though they want to kill you, but you cannot treat them that way.
Right. Yeah.
As General Mattis used to say, be polite, be professional, have a plan to kill everyone you meet, which is exhausting, right?
Yeah.
I would imagine. Yeah.
It's like, all right, I'm going to do that with a pie plate, a rake, I mean, I still do it today.
You
right?
thought your commute was bad.
Right.
I'm gonna kill everyone in this room at all times.
Like, it's exhausting.
Be polite. Be prepared. Yeah. Whoa. Oh man. Wow. That's heavy stuff. Let's take a quick break.
Yep. BP happens to be my initials. Brian Patrick.
Yep.
That's not why I'm called BP.
Oh.
So in the Marine Corps, when you sign your name, it's just first, second initial, then your name.
Yep.
Brand new second lieutenant, very first field operation. And I'm worried about the tactics and everything else we have to get from point A to point B to get in position, to do the mission. And I completely blow the navigation. and I go up the wrong valley. And then my Marines are following me,
Yeah.
and I realize this. And in order to correct it, failure is retrieved with valor.
Yeah. Oh,
Over the
up and
top.
over.
So it was this superhuman effort all night long,
Yep.
Oh,
all night long to get to the other side. So everybody's getting drugged through my knothole.
Yep.
But we get to where we're supposed to be in time, do the mission, and we get back after the field op, and the senior enlisted company first sergeant, First Sergeant Kirby, ugliest man in the Marine Corps. We called him Horse-Face Kirby. And he comes in and he pulls the trash can up, little waste paper basket, GI issue, metal, and sits on it. And he had these big horse teeth, and he sucks through them. He goes, "Lieutenant, you're about a base plate mofo." And I'm like, "First Sergeant." And so a base plate,
Pardon?
a base plate is a piece of the mortar system. So you've seen those tubes that
Yep.
people drop rounds down
Yep.
and they shoot out. And so at the bottom of that is this big metal disc. It's got a sphere that rotates so that tube can go 360.
Mhm.
So it's got one moving part, big
Yep.
chunk of metal,
Yep.
and it's made to absorb impact. He
Mm.
goes, "You are about a base plate mofo." And I'm like, "Pardon, excuse me, First Sergeant." I mean, even though I'm senior to him, I'm not senior
Right.
to him, right?
Right.
And he's like, goes, "You only got one moving part, but you can take a beating." And he goes, "You're going to be okay." And it was like, at the same time, it was like this complete insult.
Uh-huh.
And this, and you could tell he was just filled with disgust
Mm.
at my navigation error,
Mm.
but also with a little bit of, you're going to be okay,
Mm.
for sucking it up and owning it, and
Right.
and taking everybody over, and
Gentlemen?
apologizing for it.
we still love you, however.
It's like, you're going to be okay.
Mm.
And so base plate over time just got conflated to BP.
Mm.
And so, so that's how
Happy coincidence.
happy
Yes.
coincidence. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Wow.
That's good.
Take a beating.
Take a beating.
One moving part.
Be a base plate. Right.
One moving.
Right.
forward.
Right. There are the moments when you're the gyroscope. There are moments when you're the base plate. Yeah. A couple of years ago, a friend and I went to Israel, and I was really fascinated to see everyone between high school and university, or between high school and just a career, does at least 2 years of state service. And I was really fascinated by that. Which I will say, I've been to Israel a couple times, and I will say that is a population that I do believe stands ready to kill me. I bumped a woman accidentally as we were trying to get on a train, and this woman was probably 70, but she spun around and gave me a look that said, "You try that one more time, I will collapse your trachea." Right? And I said, "Man, that's the population you need to survive in the Middle East." But at any rate, I was really fascinated by this state service, right? That every able-bodied Israeli young person is required to perform. Have you ever wished for a similar system here in the United States?
Yeah. There is certainly merit to it. But I think military is a reflection of society
Okay.
and societal values. And so Israel is surrounded by existential threats
Mm-hmm.
from their history, from the beginning.
Yep.
Going back, to Exodus.
Right.
Right.
Forget
Genesis.
1948.
Forget 1948, but all the way through. And so, I mean, that is baked into their psyche.
Mm-hmm.
And so everybody fought.
Mm-hmm.
United States doesn't have that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had the Minutemen, but for when you do reading on the Revolutionary War, there's only about a third of the population that was in it to win it. And a third were the Tories, the loyalists, and a third were just trying to stay alive and out of the way and not starve. And so, that whole idea, when I write about, we don't have a warrior culture.
Yeah.
It's a myth. There's nothing about us that is martial. Playing video games and, touting your Second Amendment rights and walking around with an M4, long gun in public does not make you a warrior. And so, I don't know what it makes you, but it's not a warrior. There's affectation, but it's not what I would classify as a dedicated professional warrior. So I dedicated my entire life, from the time I was 18 or 19 to the time I was 50 to that. And I mentioned in the email, we don't have and it's in the book, we don't have, and we say it's an all volunteer force.
Yeah.
Which connotes a certain altruistic motivation.
Sure.
But it's,
I want to serve.
I want to serve. I want to serve my country. Most of those, and we're glad to have them, come in, they're recruited, and it's transaction. You're going to get a college degree. You're going to get this skill that you can go out and be marketable, and that's all.
You're going to get out of your parents' household.
Yeah, you're not going to be living in your basement anymore, and that's a big step.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, and you're going to do some hard things, and so we're grateful for that. But to say it's an all volunteer force is, I think, a bit of a stretch. And America does not, even those coming out of boot camp, those coming out of Marine boot camp aren't warriors, and so I equate them to a lion cub.
I remember reading that. That struck, that caught my eye.
They can mimic it. They can stalk, they can pounce, they can play, but they haven't really been schooled in the art of coming to blows with the enemy at close quarters. And that's what it's about. It is it is not, it's not like the movies. It's not glamorous. It is hard, dirty work. And I talked to Marines today, like they come in like, well, I'm not going to get to go to combat. That's all over. I don't know why I'm serving. I'm like, kind of have the hey mofo talk with them. And like, listen, I toiled in obscurity for a decade almost before I saw combat. And, where you're, going without sleep, going without food, freezing at night, sweating in in the desert, training for these things that may never happen. And to, there's, you're not going to get to play the game. You're going to have 2 days, football practice, for 10 years, and maybe you'll get a game.
Or maybe not.
Or maybe not.
Yeah.
And you should be so lucky.
Yeah.
But
Careful what you wish for.
yeah, careful what you wish for. And some guys, they're young men. They want to prove themselves. Sure. I wanted to prove myself. And so, they don't realize that it is blue collar work. And so there's 2 kind of jobs, right? There's a job where you take a shower at the beginning of the day before you go to work, or you take a shower at the end of the day when you come back from work.
Yeah.
Right. And this was a shower at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Vocation. Yeah. And so people don't realize that. I mean, being an infantry Marine is, you're going to get a hip replaced, you're going to get your knees replaced, you're going to have arthritis of the spine. You are going to be disabled by the time you're finished. And so they retired me at 100% disabled. There isn't anything on me that doesn't hurt every single day.
Sure.
And I'm lucky because I still have all my original parts.
Right. You're at least, they hurt, but you're able to use them.
I'm able to use them. And, with enough Motrin, and I can use them.
Yeah.
But
You mean bourbon?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Not at the
Code
same,
word,
not at the
yeah.
same time.
Motrin. Just grind that Motrin, drop it into the 40 proof.
So, so yeah,
What do you think that perhaps some of that desire to prove yourself could be dampened if our American culture had more rites of passage, particularly for young men? This is something I think Sebastian Junger talks about
Yeah,
in one of his
yeah.
books, where he's
great.
like,
He does great work.
I really like
Did you
him.
see Restrepo?
I didn't. No, I read, he has a book, I think it's just called War.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh.
and it's about his time there, if I
You
recall
could
correctly.
watch Restrepo.
Watch it. Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
Documentary, painful to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Where is it? Afghanistan.
Oh,
Yeah.
In the Korengal Valley.
Yeah.
okay.
But meanest place on earth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's these last year's high school seniors dealing.
Mm-hmm.
So anyhow,
Is that a fire base?
fire base
Last
Restrepo.
name is the name.
Named
of-
after one of the kids that died. In
I did see that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
Okay.
brutal. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
Just kidding.
Yes, sir.
And another effing thing.
Right. Yeah.
Protect you two.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Here.
He's
Right.
got
Right.
the,
For the record, Jonathan, Tom, he's got a plan. Yeah.
he's got
a plan.
He's got one of those sleeper darts.
Right. For the people on the other side of the table.
That ain't it.
Right. Exactly.
He's gonna use something else.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I noticed that got further away from me.
Right. I will say the only I don't mean to compare myself to the experiences you've had, but the only thing I think I could compare it to is my time in Central America, where sometimes on a bus or sometimes in a dark, like on a dark street, right? You're just trying to walk to your hotel, you're just trying to walk to your house, and all of a sudden there's someone, pushing on you, or there's someone reaching into your pocket, or there's someone like I don't want to say stalking, but following you, right? And you just realize,
You're
like,
being assessed as prey.
yeah, and you're just like, I'd better have a plan,
Yeah.
right? So, and actually, so one time, I think Brian, I don't know if I think I told you this story once when I was with the machete story.
That's, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe it's probably been on this episode, on this podcast before, but just so briefly, BP, I was helping out at this high school, coordinating their sporting events. And so part of the coordination is you hire these bus drivers, and these bus drivers, they don't have any association with your school. They go to these sporting events. They just go up into the jungle and drink all day. And so at the end of one of these sporting events, one of my kids had, some prank or some encouragement from some other students, kicked in a window on another bus. And that bus driver comes down out of the jungle. He's loose, he's a bottle of tequila in, he's a big guy. And like, he climbs onto my bus and he wants to find the culprit. So, he charges at me. I go, he hit me. I go flying, but I'm like, he's going to kill this kid. Why did I think that? He said, I'm going to kill that kid. So, he runs out of the bus. I'm following him thinking like, yeah, like if he finds my guy, who knows what'll happen. So he's out there, he's shouting, he's making a big drama about it. But then he says like, where's my machete? Where's my machete? And he runs to his bus and pulls out this big machete and starts waving it in my face. And I just, yeah. And I just remember standing there being like, my mother is going to be so pissed when she finds out I got beheaded in Belize. Right. I'm never going to hear the end of it.
I'm never going to go anywhere again.
Right. Exactly. You got beheaded at a track and field event, for a bus window, So, but then the crazy thing is, so eventually a couple of cops.
That wasn't the great. Go ahead.
Right. Well, so the insult to the injury was, so a couple of cops ran up and got him calmed down. So I kept my head. But But then the other like coach who was leading this trip, he comes up to me and he says, like, how much do we have, like, just in our, uh, like cash bag? And I'm like, I don't know, 200 Belize, something like that. And I'm like, but like, we're buying the kids dinner for the long bus ride home with that money. Like that money is spoken for. He's like, no, we got to bribe this guy. I'm like, who's this guy? Like the cop? He's like, no, no, no. We got to bribe the bus driver to walk away. I'm like, the guy who almost killed me? He said, yep, yep, we got to bribe him. Give me the cash.
Yeah, you have the personal affront
Yeah.
he's had to endure. He was never going to cut your head off, but he has to make such a show
Yeah.
how insulted he is
Yeah.
so that the price
Yeah. Yeah.
meets his indignation.
Exactly.
His ego was
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
I wonder how
Yeah.
many times he does that a month.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah.
It's 20%.
This window is just a piece of plexiglass that they slide in, you know. Oh yeah, exactly. Oh man, you want a place that's ripe for some cons.
Oh,
Yeah, Belize is a great
I
place for
would
that sort
laugh
of thing.
10 minutes.
No, 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 Brian, you
I'd be on a
no,
plane
no,
home.
yeah.
I'd be on a plane back home.
Yeah. Well, so anyway, I wanted to be on a plane back home. So I was like, so yeah, so I go and get literally the lunch money.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, all right, go and bribe them so that we can just leave and go back home. And so we don't have to go to the police station for 6 hours
And
till midnight. Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Different kind of shit. Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, so it was literally I'm not making this up. I was on the bus ride home and I thought to myself, when I get back to America, I'm learning martial arts.
that was the
That was
origin story.
Yeah, so 6 months later or 8 months later, I'm at my first jujitsu lesson.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I haven't faced a swinging machete since.
It was working.
Right, it works. Yeah.
Tiger Woods. That's great.
Mhm.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
That's a great story.
Oh man,
I
it's
love that one.
it's fantastic. But like I will say, so I'm just kind of bringing it back around to just my question. So I just remember coming back from that international experience, just learning to navigate cultural barriers, language barriers, but also that volunteering was you were serving something bigger than yourself. And I remember coming back from that experience and thinking, this has really rounded out my education and my sense of the world, right? There are people who have grown up in such a different way, in such a different perspective. And I just remember thinking, golly, everyone should do this. And then a couple of years later, I'm in Israel, and you've got these 19-year-olds like basically doing border security at airports or wherever else. And I just think, wow, I felt like they gained something that the typical American teenager doesn't access.
It doesn't necessarily. This is someone else's idea, obviously not mine. Someone suggested that some mandatory service duty. It could be military, could be working at the hospital in exposition, could be working in a senior care facility. Some mandatory, maybe months. I think that's what American kids could tolerate.
90 days.
During their high school years, some number of months where they spend X amount of time every X amount of days at this place doing X amount of work. It's easy for me to say that now that I'm old and
that would be grand. I mean,
I think it was.
But I don't know that our society would tolerate it.
What? Really?
So, I mean, the draft in Vietnam supposed to be a universal draft, unless you were rich.
Yes. However,
you could have bones. You could have enough money to have a doctor tell you had bone spurs.
100%. Totally.
That was the.
Oh yeah, totally.
That was the way out.
There were all sorts of ways out.
That's how Trump got out.
Canada. Trump dodged that. Well,
he dodged that. Yeah. Bush got into the National Guard.
Yeah.
And so, Yeah, it's just,
Well,
it-
I agree, the society may not tolerate a military specific mandatory duty, but extend that to nursing care, some kind of
Peace Corps.
Peace
Yeah,
Corps, some kind
yeah.
of volunteer work.
I can't, your wound is exposed.
Oh,
and it's like,
geez, did the camera pick up on that? Speaking of old and infirm.
I don't do well with blood or needles.
I'm sorry about that. I
Right.
apologize.
Right. Exactly. You're right, Brian. Pop that collar a little bit more. Right.
Get the good angle. There's not too many left.
Oh, what are you talking about? You still got a full head of hair, yeah.
So I'm gonna,
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that has been flirted with, that concept of universal service
Okay.
in something, anything,
Mhm.
just about anything.
just about anything.
Mhm.
Again, I think our nation is so affluent and comfortable. And when I say affluent and comfortable, I mean fat and rich.
Yeah.
That we have time to obsess about the inconsequential.
Mhm.
We have the time to flip through a lot of TikTok videos.
Yeah, and so that's not a serious country. And Bill Maher said it great. He goes, "We're not a serious country." I'm not a fan of Bill Maher, but
Who is really?
damn if he doesn't make sense.
Sometimes he's the only one.
Somebody, he's the only one in the room that's making sense. And he says, we're not a serious nation if you do these things,
Mm.
and he's right. And so, can we be a serious nation? I think 100%, but I think our nation has proven that it takes an existential threat to do that. So you see the way we responded to Pearl Harbor after being, out of the war.
Mhm.
Yeah, hey, we'd love to help you, Britain. I know you're standing alone,
Mm.
and you're our closest ally. We'll give you some.
We'll give you some stuff.
But you do you.
But that's Europe.
You're looking good.
Yeah.
You're looking good. You got this.
You got it.
And then Pearl Harbor happens, and now we were the arsenal of democracy. Now we were the chainmail fist of democracy, and you saw the way the economy turned into a wartime economy in the production. We were building Liberty ships faster than the Japanese and Germans could sink them.
Mm-hmm.
It was a math game at that point.
Do you think that kind of industrial shift in our economy?
No,
that's not possible again.
No,
right?
we shit
Not at the manufacturing level.
No, we shit our pants in COVID. I mean, we patted ourselves on the back when the cottage industries made worthless COVID masks.
The masks were a disaster. However, the vaccine was an exceptional triumph. How quickly they developed one. Distribute might be, I'd be out of my depth there, but the development of a vaccine was exceptional.
That would be the singular success.
Masks, not so much. Distribution of that was
policy
pretty rough. Policy was awful.
Yeah, policy was awful.
But you mean in terms of the research and the development of the intellectual property side of it?
Oh, hell yeah. The pharmaceutical industry.
It was motivated by,
we got it.
Motivated by money.
Motivated by money.
Well, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, money.
Totally. Yeah, totally. You're right. And they freaking stepped up. Like they generated a vaccine toot sweet once the funding was available.
Sure. Yeah. Right. I remember talking with a historian, and he said the single greatest strategic oversight Japan made was thinking that America could not produce the particularly naval tonnage that it did. They just
What study is that?
I would have to ask him like where he sort of from what he aggregated his sources. And where he got the quotes. But I mean, he just went through the numbers of they just didn't understand how fast we could put ships in the water.
That's interesting. I had understood the narrative of they knew we could outproduce them eventually. But there was this sweet spot of like knock them out of the war early
Mhm.
and get them to sue for peace before they could get that industrial.
Before that
base.
came
I think
online.
it's how fast they could get it.
Interesting. Okay.
How
A
fast
clear
they could put.
miscalculation.
Well,
We-
they didn't knock us out of the way. They didn't hit the carriers
Mhm.
in Pearl Harbor,
Right.
which is what they were actually out at sea.
Yeah.
And that's what they were going for. The battleships that they sunk were already obsolete.
Yeah.
They were obsolete.
They were closer to a dreadnought than a modern war machine.
Right.
So,
You know,
right. Hooray, we sunk a ship. Well,
Yeah. Okay. You know,
Well,
was
let's
that
not
real?
disparage their Zona, please.
well, the Oklahoma went down too.
yeah.
True.
That was the one that was capsized.
Mm.
What's the one that has that spectacular detonation that is in all black and white footage of
I
Pearl
don't know.
Harbor?
I don't know.
Right, you know the one.
Yeah,
I'm
I know
talking
that.
about,
I
that
know the
yes.
picture. Yeah.
Mhm.
Have you been
Everybody's seen
to
it.
Pearl Harbor?
No, I've not been to.
In the Arizona?
Okay.
Have you been?
I've not. No. Got to get out there.
It's a must see. The
Yeah,
oil
I
is still
believe it.
bubbling up.
Yeah, the oil is still.
Really?
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, then the one carrier that was down that they had to get up from Midway, it said it'd be a year's worth of work, and they got it running in 3 weeks.
Mhm.
Coral Sea. It was damaged at the Coral Sea,
Okay.
and it was
Was
the
it-
Lexington. So badly damaged, it'd be months, and got it, battle worthy in 3 days. And so the Japanese were not counting
Wow.
on that. They thought it was actually sunk.
Yeah.
And so they had marked it off the board. And then they got that back in action for Midway. Japanese sunk it the second time around. Actually, we sunk it. It was so damaged
We're like,
that we put torpedoes into
yeah.
it
Oh.
and sank it. And but they lost, there are 4 carriers that were up there
That was Midway.
Midway.
Have you seen that movie, the Midway movie?
Which one?
Well, I guess the
latest
most
one?
recent one.
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty cool.
It was well done.
Yeah.
It's historically accurate.
Oh, it's not a drama. It's not a love story. It's like fairly historically accurate.
100%.
Last one I can think of is like that 1960s, 70s era.
There was that
That's the
one.
one I can think
And then
of.
there was, I know I'm on microphone. There was the one with Ben Affleck,
Yes.
Pearl Harbor. Yeah.
Pearl Harbor,
Yeah.
which nobody should take seriously.
Well, shout out to Ben Affleck.
You know,
Yeah.
with
Shout out to Michael Bay. Yeah. The greatest American director
Oh my
of
God.
his generation. Michael Bay. Yeah.
South
Yeah.
Park did a number on him.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
I'll have to see that.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know that episode.
That's not directing, that's special effects.
Yeah, all right.
Boom, boom.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. I can.
Yeah, yeah. No, Michael Bay. He is a purely American director, right?
I just
You
wanna
could not
say,
see his movie and think,
anybody
oh, he
in-
must be French.
Anybody in Hollywood listening, I will vote for whoever you tell me to.
It's been working so far.
Right.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I'll vote for whoever you tell me to. Oh my gosh. Wow.
So what question have you not asked that you want to ask but don't want to ask?
That I don't want to ask. Do young men need to see combat in order to be fully mature?
No,
No.
no.
What you say, I think you'd call it a laboratory in your book. You've referenced it in this talk sometimes as the most intense of human experiences. Is there a discrete divide between those who have seen combat and those who have not? Are we sort of infantile unless we've seen this part of human experience?
So I actually get versions of this all the time.
Okay.
And so trauma is trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Combat is traumatizing.
Yep.
Life is traumatizing.
Yep.
It's degrees of consequence. So it's scale, not kind.
Okay.
Mm.
And having seen combat doesn't make you any more complete a person than somebody who hasn't.
Okay.
It's just an experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's what you do with your experiences. So there are people, domestic abuse, child abuse, that have been much more traumatized than I ever was in
Mhm.
combat. Seeing dismembered bodies, seeing torture victims, seeing people I loved killed, um, being injured myself, being separated from my family, missing my kids growing up, and out of the I missed my kids growing up from 2003 to 2012.
Hmm.
9 years, I just wasn't in their life.
Mhm.
And at pretty important years. It's what you do with trauma, and do you grow from it, or do you, um, you know, or do you dwell on it and become a victim? And there are plenty of victims that are combat veterans out there.
Ah. You can take your experience and somehow become stuck with it.
Stuck, what we call stuck on the X. And so on the X, the term we use on the X is like on the objective.
Yeah.
And we talk about actions on the X, violence of action, what we do once we get there, once we do all the movement, all the infiltration, whatever the means of insert is, violence, on the X.
Right.
What happens there? Some guys never leave that. And they don't grow. So I had an opportunity to go to Normandy. I was when I went to the National War College. There were 10 of us that got selected to go to France and debate on international security issues. Our counterpart, French National War College, the Col de Quer or something like that. But and so it just turned out to be a lot of drinking, actually. But one weekend we had the opportunity to go to Normandy.
Mm.
And so we piled into a car, drove to Normandy, and we're literally driving with it was a placemat map from a restaurant. We stopped for breakfast someplace, and the map, the placemats were maps of Normandy. Like we're driving around trying to find the different little towns.
I'm sensing
villages.
a theme with your navigation techniques,
Right.
but we can come back to that.
There's a lot of holes in my game.
Right.
Navigation being one. I've
That
been
might
lost
be
on
one.
I've been asking the French for directions for 20 years. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of them was a
Like,
cute French
yeah.
chick. Yeah.
It's been working for me.
Right.
I've been lost on 6 of the 7 continents. Just to let you know. And
So you're in the car with the placemats from Denny's.
from Denny's, Dedois.
Excuse me.
We're in French. We're in France.
Of course.
And so we wind up in this Saint Mary Glaze.
Mhm.
And so if you remember the Longest Day movie, the paratrooper that's hanging from the church steeple,
Mhm.
that happened.
Mhm.
And there was a mannequin hanging from that church steeple still.
Oh, shoot.
And so when you go there,
Huh.
and there was this guy named Howard who had parachuted in as a private on June 6, 1944, landed in the cemetery, and he was in the bar 100 yards from where he landed. This is in 2004
Uh-huh.
or 2005, spring of 2005. We're there.
Hmm.
And the guy was a complete asshole. As I'm talking to him, he had not moved physically or metaphorically 70 years, more than 100.
70 years.
That was his moment. Didn't really just, he dropped in, he did it, did his thing, you're a hero, greatest generation, yak, yak, yak. But what have you done with that
He is
experience?
stuck on the X.
He's stuck on the X.
Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow.
He is stuck on the X. And so what do you do with it? And that's what I challenge my Marines. Like, this doesn't make you any better than anybody else. It's an experience, and you can look at it any way. You can look at it as trauma, or you can look at it as a gift. that you experience these things and it is part of you now.
Mm.
It's what you do with it. So if every decade of your life is a chapter in a book,
Mm.
how many people stop writing anything meaningful after chapter 4?
Shit.
Right? And then what do you, I mean, chapters 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, if you get to it,
Mm.
you know, like who wants to read that?
Mm.
You know, so
And I retired
I retired and I
to a
played
55
golf.
plus community.
Yeah, I have a 55 plus community. I have 2 martini lunches, sometimes 3. Not if there's anything wrong with that.
I'm sitting right here. How dare you?
Well, I would have said perfect. I was reflecting on myself. I'm a martini guy.
Okay.
And so, so what are you doing with your life
Mm.
that God, this the life God gave you?
Mm.
You know, this gift that you have, that the fact that you're still upright, your job is to live your life in a way that makes an impact.
Yeah.
And what are you giving back to society? What are you giving back to your fellow man? What do what's in your wallet?
Mm.
What have you done?
Right.
And
Right.
so, I mean, that's how I mean, this old carcass, the Sufferfest, those are all my attempts to stay engaged, to get the PhD and the work I'm able to do with the Marine Corps still on that, on doing research on team cognition
Mm-hmm.
and making better commanders, more emotionally intelligent commanders, dealing with metacognition, which is how we think about our thinking,
Oh, yeah.
being introspective about how we think and not automatic.
Okay.
So,
How to stand apart from our own thinking.
yeah, investigate your own thinking,
Yeah.
your mental models, your sense making approach,
Mm-hmm.
your biases. Those are all your biases or blinders that keep you from seeing all the options that are available to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're baked
Yeah.
in.
Uh-huh.
And
Right. And maybe from the way we were raised, or maybe from something we adopted, but whatever the reason, we think this way, and maybe we shouldn't be thinking this
well,
way.
I do when I do and in the commander's course, there's one point I'm talking about biases and whatnot, and I take a break and I say, all right, everybody pair up.
Mhm.
And everybody remembers how to thumb wrestle, right? We're going to thumb wrestle. And these are, 40-year-old men.
Yeah.
And they're like, I wanna do it.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, this is real and this is happening.
Yeah.
You're going to thumb wrestle. And so they get that. And I'm like, in the next 15 seconds, I want to see who can get the most pins. And they're like, game.
Sir,
Because
yes,
I
sir.
know their bias and they're hardwired to compete and win.
Mhm.
That's what they do. I'm
Mhm.
like, so which team is what I say can get the most pins? And they go at it. 15 seconds goes by and like one, none. I'm like, what if I told you the record was 40? And they're like,
In 15
They're like,
seconds.
yeah, it's like 20 seconds,
Oh,
but
okay, yeah.
40. They're like, no way. Scientific answer, way. The difference was, you took it as a competition instead of a collaboration. I said, which team couldn't get the most pins?
Uh,
And so,
Oh.
and I had just gave the class on bias.
Just had
And they're like, they're totally chagrined. And I'm like, you being Marines, in the way we're brought up, it's baked into your DNA that you're going to do this. Your enemy knows that too.
we're gonna dominate.
Yeah. And so it's a starter.
Just cracks that shell.
Yep.
A little bit of a crack.
Yep.
You can
A little bit of a
feel
We
it.
crack.
gotta
that I
color. We have to color outside the lines.
Yeah. So
That's good.
you got any more priceless Doug Fur to throw in there?
I mean,
No, not in front of Brian. I do.
They'll
Yeah.
never grow again.
Right. It's that endangered wideband black walnut. That's the stuff I've really been
Yeah.
keeping. Yeah.
Got some walnut slab we can.
Right, exactly.
Let's
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah. Priceless $40,000 black walnut burl. You know,
You got some cherry wood in your house.
yeah.
Do actually, yeah, we can
All
go
right.
grab that.
I've got the,
Yeah.
the poles for the Ark of the Covenant.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
like chuck those in there.
Yeah.
Acacia wood,
Chuck in, right.
those
Chuck in
deals.
all 3 cubits of it, you know.
There's some arc wood.
Yeah, I've got a one. Yeah, I've got a 1 cubit. Yeah, I've got a 1 cubit fireplace. We can toss it in. Oh my gosh, yeah. No, that priceless Doug fir. Well, BP, no, this has been a really wonderful conversation. I'm already thinking like, man, what can we talk about next time? But time runs short. Just real briefly, can you just tell us about one of your upcoming Sufferfests? What we can be looking forward to hearing about as your next adventure?
Yeah, I think I talked, and I don't know if the mic was on, but I've got 3 coming up in 2025. Because 1 a year just wasn't enough.
Uh-huh.
And so January, it's 5 days, 17-mile hike, 20-mile hike, 50-mile bike, 16-mile paddle, 58-mile bike in Big Bend National Forest down in Texas. And then April, crater, the meteor crater outside Flagstaff,
Okay.
150 miles in 3 days, 50 of that hiking, 100 of it biking, mountain biking to the south rim of the Grand Canyon.
Yep.
And then November, Patagonia is about 250 miles over 6 days
Okay.
of bike and hike and
Bike and hike.
and
Gotcha.
a little bit of kayak in there.
Okay.
20 miles.
And you do this with one friend of yours every time.
We call it Sufferfest. It's also we also call it Tard Fest because we're both emotionally retarded. I know that's not PC, but since I'm saying it about myself, it's okay.
Right. Right.
And so we're both Marines, 28 years. We were instructors at the Amphibious Warfare School together, and started. Been my mountaineering partner, race partner, Sufferfest partner. We've been doing stupid stuff for 25 years,
Right.
and now we're just getting more sophisticated about it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And
Right. Now we do stupid stuff on $8,000 bicycles.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
right.
right. Yeah. And so that, but it is spiritual in a way. And so we have I was telling you on the phone, we had the 3 rules, which if you haven't read The Comfort Crisis, have you read The
I've
Comfort
not read
Crisis?
it. No.
So they talk about this concept of the misogi, which is a Japanese test of some sort. And in there they offer, and we were already kind of doing this before I knew there was a misogi. But I borrowed from that. But there were 3 rules to the misogi. 1, you're not allowed to die. 2, has to be hard enough that you only have a 50-50 chance of completing it. So it's got to be hard. And 3, it doesn't go on social media. And so that's been what I have been operating under. I didn't find out till we're in the middle of Iceland. I go over these rules again with my buddy and find out that he's been putting his stuff on social media.
Uh-oh.
And because he's talking about like, I got these people, they're giving me endorsements, want me to test gear. I'm like, how do they find you? I'm like, oh, social media. I'm like, what are you doing? And he goes, well, I told him about the Jackson Hole picnic, where you bike from Jackson Hole, swim Jenny Lake, 1.5 miles, summit the Grand, which is 20-mile, 7,000 vertical, class 5 climbing, back, re-swim the lake, and go back. We kayaked the first leg of the lake just because didn't want to get in the water twice. And he's been telling about this stuff, all our Sufferfest. And
that was the last time we saw him alive.
That's the last time I saw him
he was
alive.
dead.
So I was like, I thought we agreed. He goes, I didn't agree to that. So,
I gotta get out there.
I
I gotta be out there.
I gotta be out there.
Right.
So anyhow, that's
gotta put it right. Gotta put these things in writing.
yeah. So
You've got a ton coming up, is what it sounds like. Just a ton.
a ton
Yeah,
coming
that's
up.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, I can.
Yeah.
Well, I can. So one day I won't be able to do this, but day's not this day. Not that day.
Right.
I have one last question. How often do you read? So you've mentioned a lot of books, and I'm like, I don't know many people that read a lot. Like I grew up with my family. My dad reads an hour every day. That's like his thing. Um, but I don't meet that many people that read that often. So I'm just curious.
Pretty much read every day.
Read every day. Okay.
A lot of my reading now is more of in the academic realm. So doing research, reading academic journals, that type of stuff. For fun, I read my summer reading was the Centennial by James Michener, about 1,000-page book, which was just
Tome.
it's a tome.
Real door stopper.
And then I'm into Grapes of Wrath right
Mhm.
now. But
That's Steinbeck, right?
Steinbeck, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I know the U.S. threatened to, ban TikTok, which would have been a crisis because we would have had to find another reason to not read books.
Right.
Without
Yeah.
TikTok.
We would have had to cook up. Yeah. Yeah. Some banal frivolity.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Well, thanks for your time. Thanks for
Oh my gosh,
the
thank you.
hospitality.
Yeah.
I crushed the
Yeah. I
charcuterie
think this
board.
is actually the most damage we've
Yeah.
ever done to charcuterie.
Great,
board.
yeah.
It was impressive. It
Yeah.
made for
They're-
like 2 hours and
Right.
then bam.
And then bam, we're like, we're getting this brie murdered.
So I don't know what your lunch plan is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So true. Normally I just like rake the rest of it into a baggie and that's what I eat the next day. Well, Brian BP, thanks so much for coming back on for an episode. It's really been an absolute pleasure. And really, we just we'll be looking forward to the next one more than anything else.
Yeah.
All right.
That's super
Great.
fun. Really had
Yeah.
a great time. Thanks,
Thank you.
Tom. Thank
Yeah.
John.
Thank you.